Hi, Katiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Friday to you. I know it's been quite a week across the region. Weather-wise, it's been relatively quiet here locally, but we have seen a few changes here just in the last 24 hours. Things getting a lot more humid out there and a considerable amount of cloud cover. We're still watching a trough down over the southwestern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and models are starting to come into a little bit more agreement, at least the latest runs that have just come down within the past few minutes, and we still have a major hurricane and a tropical storm out in the Atlantic Ocean. So got a lot to talk about, but hopefully won't have to keep you here too long on a Friday as we're all ready to kick off a weekend. Right now we've got a lot of cloud cover out there, and our temperatures are hovering right around 80 degrees with mostly cloudy skies. It does feel like 84 though, with the humidity, and those dew points have really come up. They're back in the low 70s, so it is feeling a lot more like summertime, even though we're in October now. But we are going to start to see some better cold fronts moving their way down to the south. And we've got one that's going to come in here on Monday, and another one that looks a lot stronger coming into the following week, where we might actually say, oh yeah, this really is fall, by Louisiana standards at least. But we do have quite a bit of rain on the radar this afternoon. Most of it is in the offshore waters, but you can see down here toward Patterson, Morgan City, and Amelia, and then points eastward as you get over into portions of Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes, Assumption as well. You're going to be seeing that continuing here over the next several hours. If you got some travel plans, maybe over to the Crescent City, there's going to be some areas of rain there. We'll go ahead and pull up the Hammond radar to give you a little bit better idea of some of the intensity of some of that rain. Got some pretty good downpours occurring over to around Homa and Thibodaux, and then Lockport, and then getting down to Galliano, you've got some pretty heavy rain. So as we go back and forth between the two radars, you can see this does extend farther offshore into the coastal waters here south of Vermilion, as well as over into Cameron parishes. So we're going to keep the rain chance at about 40%. Here in Lafayette, I think we've got a chance to see some scattered showers, but if you live northwest of Lafayette, probably not going to see a whole lot of rain this time around. But on our traffic cameras, we are looking at mostly cloudy skies out there. At least our roadways locally are dry right now, so there's no issues on the traveling. But as I said, if you've got some travel plans eastward over toward the capital city or the Crescent City, you will likely run into some rain. So let's go ahead and start out with the tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. And yesterday, the blob that was over the central part of the Gulf of Mexico was more yellow. It was a 30% chance, but the National Hurricane Center now bumping that back up into the 40% chance for some development. Doesn't look like anything's going to happen in the next couple of days or really over the weekend, but we might get a chance of seeing a surface low developing there over the southwestern Gulf, perhaps into Monday or Tuesday. And a lot of the models are now starting to suggest that maybe we'll have a surface feature, maybe a tropical depression or tropical storm kind of sliding its way over toward Florida. I know we've been talking about this now for well over a week, and I think we're still going to be talking about it for yet another week, but there's a lot of moisture that's down there, and it's kind of an upper trough that's been sitting there. Dry air, as you can see, is over much of Texas and northwestern Louisiana. So some of our friends who live there in the northern parts of Acadiana are catching a lot more sunshine, while here in Lafayette and point southeastward, we got the gray skies, and we're also looking at the chances for rain. Also, because of a pretty good pressure gradient, we're still seeing some gusty winds out in the offshore waters. Not exactly the best boating day, particularly since we've got the showers and thunderstorms that are out there too. But we're looking at winds basically out of the east to east-northeast, about 15 to 20 knots. And seas are going to be about 2 to 3 feet in the nearshore waters and about 3 to 4 feet in the far offshore waters. And if you're going way out there, especially off the southeastern coast of Louisiana, you might be catching some 5-foot seas out there too. But looking at the satellite imagery there over the Gulf of Mexico, we're still looking at that trough, and we've got quite a bit of moisture that's building here over the Bay of Campeche. So this is kind of going to be the area to watch, and the models have been suggesting a couple of different features over the last couple of days. One with maybe just a low developing here, maybe a low developing and kind of spinning around out here. And then we even had a couple of models that were picking up on an old tropical depression that was in the Pacific And the remnants of that is kind of scooting here northward from the Pacific into parts of the Bay of Campeche. So there's a number of different weak features that are out there. And we still are going to have to wait and see how all this is going to come together. But I wouldn't be surprised to see at least a surface low really starting to develop there over the western part of the Bay of Campeche, and then possibly seeing some development and moving it eventually out in this particular direction come sometime late next week. So at this point, for us here in Louisiana, I think what we're going to be dealing with is just some excess rain and some gustier winds there in the offshore waters. But right now, it does not look like we're going to see any threat to the Acadiana region. So every day we go, we're closer and closer to the end of the hurricane season and hoping that we're going to be able to escape this once again as we go through 2024. So we'll go through the model suite, and we're going to kind of zoom in more here on the western part of the Atlantic. You are going to notice a couple of tropical systems there on the far right. That's going to be Leslie. That's going to kind of come a little bit farther to the west by about day 6 or 7. And this is the GFS 10-day outlook. And as you can see, it's got a low pressure area that develops sometime late this weekend. We'll go ahead and let it recycle here and start over. But you can see that we've got a bit of a low that's going to start to develop there over the Bay of Campeche, and then maybe making its way to tropical storm force and possibly working its way over the peninsula of Florida. So that would avoid most areas that took the severe hit from Hurricane Helene. I know all along the west coast of Florida here, we did get several areas of flooding because of the storm surge, but the real damage was here from the Big Bend area and, of course, going up into the Carolinas there. So it does appear that we might see a low that will kind of cruise its way off toward the northeast, and because most of the models are now coming into a little more agreement, it's a little easier to bite on that forecast. So the Euro also has a low out here, but it meanders into Monday. This is Tuesday, this is Wednesday, then going into Thursday of next week. Very similar to the GFS, it had a very weak low pressure area, probably a tropical depression, maybe borderline tropical storm, but nothing super significant. But that's going to be bringing some gustier winds to the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, with more of a trough that's going to be digging here to the west. That should pick this up and slide it off toward the northeast. And this trough that's going to be digging here next week is actually going to send a cold front through and give us some fairly pleasant temperatures here at home as we go into the middle part of next week. Canadian model is still probably the most robust when it comes to development, but it has to just kind of scoot around the central part of the Gulf of Mexico for most of the weekend and then starts to make its way off toward the east. So we've got some development there into Monday and Tuesday, then it kind of meanders there over the Yucatan into Thursday and Friday, and then it doesn't really get a good kick to the east until sometime next weekend or the early part of the following week. And during the month of October, when you've got some steering currents that are quite a bit lower here over the Western Caribbean and the Southern Gulf, not that unusual that you're going to see something kind of stalling out there. But the Canadian model with that deeper pressure is probably going for a stronger tropical storm, if not maybe a hurricane. And I'll explain why I'm a little concerned about what the Canadian and also what the Icon model is showing. Again, it's very similar to the other three. You get some development here to the south, maybe going into Tuesday of next week, and then you get a fairly deep low pressure area that would probably be a tropical storm making its way over toward Florida. So you got two models that are increasing the intensity, and the GFS and the European model are kind of keeping it more on a low end scale. But there's a bunch of factors that could come into play here between, let's say, the Bay of Campeche and the southwestern coast of Florida. And one of those is the tropical cyclone heat potential. As we saw with Hurricane Helene, and as we've seen with other tropical systems in the past, if they can get into these areas where you have that high heat potential, and particularly like what you're seeing here over the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, if you get just the right atmospheric conditions, you can see these things ramping up very, very quickly, and you could get some rapid intensification. Now, does that mean it's going to be going up to a Category 4 hurricane? Not likely, but if you've got a tropical depression that's kind of coming off the Yucatan Peninsula, it might have a chance in that particular area to ramp its way up to a strong tropical storm or possibly a low-end hurricane. So our friends in Florida are going to be watching this a lot more than what we are, because while it's in the disorganized stage, we are going to be dealing with more general rain and just some gusty winds in the offshore waters. Of course, water temperatures there are well high enough to support any kind of tropical weather, and the wind shear right now is relatively light over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and it's expected to stay that way for most of the weekend. But then look what happens into next week. Again, that trough that we're talking about is going to be digging right about in here, and that should pick up anything that would be out here and push it off into that little area where you got the weaker wind shear off to the northeast. So again, this is just the GFS look at the wind shear, but fortunately, wind shear and a trough should protect most of Louisiana from any tropical weather as long as it'll pick this up and get it out of the way. There's still a chance maybe the trough would just kind of miss it, but most of the models are indicating a nice push off toward the east, which is good news for us. Meanwhile, as we look at the Caribbean Sea, things not so bad out there. Very, very quiet. Again, the western part of the Caribbean is one of these areas right in here that we do tend to see a little bit more tropical development in October as well as November. Fortunately, most of the action that develops in this particular area likes to go northward and then curve back out to sea in that direction. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't see some development and have something head over toward the Gulf of Mexico. That's always a possibility, and we've seen that happen before. Hurricane Lily is a good example. We also had Hurricane Delta, which kind of came from that area and then cruised on toward the north, and then you've got Hurricane Zeta, which kind of developed a little bit farther toward the west, but still made that northeastward turn. And the Tropical Atlantic satellite showing Major Hurricane Kirk right there in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. It is not expected to bother any land areas, so we're in good shape there. Bermuda is way over here, so we're not going to worry about that. But it is going to be sending some fairly large swells off toward the west. So northern sides of the Caribbean islands and the east coast of the United States could possibly see some rougher seas coming up this weekend and early next week. You'll also notice out here you've got Tropical Storm Leslie that is still trying to work its way in the path, or kind of in the just kind of following along with Hurricane Kirk, and it looks like it's going to continue to strengthen. But Kirk is a formidable hurricane there with winds at 140 miles per hour. It was at 145 earlier today, so it's still a Category 4 hurricane, and it's expected to stay a major hurricane over the weekend. And then a larger trough is going to pick it up and slide it off toward the northeast. British Isles and western parts of Europe will be affected by what's left of Hurricane Kirk. Probably have a pretty good windstorm, bringing a lot of tropical moisture there to parts of Western Europe. Meanwhile, Tropical Storm Leslie is hanging out in the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. It is still a tropical storm, but it is forecast to become a hurricane. It's seen some steady strengthening over the last 24 hours. So we think this is going to become a hurricane and kind of move out northwestward into the Gulf of Mexico, rather into the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. But most likely down the road, even though some of the forecasts are kind of bringing it in this particular area, we should get some decent troughs coming off the east coast, and eventually that should turn this back out to sea. And at this point, it doesn't seem like Leslie nor Kirk are going to be affecting the United States. But we're not done with hurricane season yet. I will mention that the GFS, even though I just showed you 10 days, is also showing the possibility of some new development going in here in the following week. So we are at October the 4th. So what we're looking at in the top graphic is the possibility of things that might develop over the Atlantic or perhaps the western part of the Caribbean next week. But then even the following week, some of the models have something trying to pick up here in the western part of the Caribbean. So as we look even into the second half of October, there's still a possibility we could see some tropical development out there. Of course, we're going to have to wait and see. Once you get out beyond 10 days, really those forecasts can be all over the place. But when you look at that red shading there over the western part of the Caribbean, that is generally where most of your tropical storms and hurricanes are going to be moving during the month of October. You get a lot of development over the western Caribbean, southern parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and then they kind of push their way off toward the northeast, back out into the Atlantic Ocean, and the western part of the Gulf really starts to shut down as you get into November. So we're in the home stretch, but we're not in the clear just yet. So we'll continue continue to watch that tropical development possibility down to our south. That would be the only concern, but I think for the most part for us, we're going to be dealing with a little extra rain, which is something we need. And October is normally kind of a drier month anyway, especially as you get toward the middle and latter part of the month. But then farther down the road, usually things start to shut down. And we're in much better shape here as we go into November. So we'll watch that little disturbance down to the south. 40% chance for development according to the National Hurricane Center. Of course, if that changes, I will update you on social media over the next several days. And speaking of social media, if you like this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. And there are my handles. They are on both Facebook and X. And if there are any significant updates when it comes to Leslie or Kirk or anything else that might try to develop to our south, I will have those on my social media pages, so check those out over the course of the weekend. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And a real quick question down there, we need rain in Texas. Any hope? Well, if this tropical stuff continues to pull off toward the northeast, unfortunately, it's going to be pulling a lot more dry air down to the south. So I'm not seeing any good rains farther to the west of Louisiana. So I think you're going to be dealing with some dry conditions, and cold fronts really aren't going to be providing you a whole lot of rain either. So hope that answers your question. Stay away RT. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you on Monday for Acadiana Weather Today at 7:30. Take it easy.